Separate talks between the US and Russia are set to commence today. Ukraine's defense minister called the talks with the United States productive, saying that they focused on protecting energy sites and critical infrastructure in Ukraine from Russian attacks. President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russia must be forced to stop the strikes and halt the invasion. He warned that without strong pressure from the international community, Moscow will continue its attacks. The US delegation, led by Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, focused on securing a Black Sea ceasefire. However, Moscow has rejected a broader ceasefire plan proposed by the US and Ukraine, only agreeing to halt aerial strikes on energy facilities. The Kremlin warns that negotiations between the US and Russia will be difficult. Russia says its main goal is discussing a possible return to a grain export deal, which it withdrew from last year. President Trump wants a rapid end to the war, but with differing positions from both sides, a lasting agreement remains uncertain. We are joined by Dr. Vesayin Ivanov-Popovsky, Professor and Vice Dean of Jindal Law School, located in New Delhi. Thank you very much for joining us. Dr. Popovsky, do you think that the US sees Ukraine as someone that they can negotiate with now, who they respect and take seriously in regard to the previous public argument in the White House with Donald Trump? Do you see these negotiations moving forward?
Oh, yes, certainly. Well, that Oval Office Friday is almost forgotten. There was a phone call between President Zelensky and President Trump, followed by the meeting in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia last night, between the delegations led by the Defense Minister of Ukraine and Witkoff, the Special Envoy, discussing specifics, as you mentioned, the energy infrastructure, how to defend it better, how solid is the safety of those energy power stations, including possibly, my sources say, they also went to discuss the shipments and to ensure safety of Ukrainian grain exports through the Black Sea. The big question, although, remains what will be the Russian response to the comprehensive ceasefire, which already was agreed back in Riyadh a week ago. Ukraine unconditionally accepted the US proposal for comprehensive ceasefire on land, sea, and air, and what remains to be seen when Moscow will get to that too.
Yes, you obviously see Zelensky and his delegates saying nothing but positive things about these negotiations. Do you think he's treading lightly, given, as you said, that Russia rejected the 30-day ceasefire that the US proposed, which they accepted?
Obviously, the question tonight, when the Russians and the Americans will speak, will be what else Russia wants before agreeing on a 30-day ceasefire. And certainly the non-cooperative side is the Russian delegation here, not the Ukrainian. I simply doubt that there will be much progress tonight, and I wonder how long it will take for the United States delegation to realize which side is not cooperative here. And it's obviously for every observer in the world that it is the Russian side that does not cooperate. So at some point, President Trump should realize that and get a strong accusation of that Russian non-cooperation.
Dr. Popovsky, Steve Witkoff, Donald Trump's special envoy, said in an interview recently, he praised Russian President Vladimir Putin, calling him a very smart guy. Why do you think that he admires Putin so much, and what are Russia doing differently than Ukraine to gain the US's trust?
I wouldn't pay much attention to that. These are polite words. Obviously, Donald Trump and Witkoff make those compliments to Russia. I don't see any point of doing that. In fact, they should do exactly the opposite, have a tough voice rather than politeness. In serious negotiations, those things do not matter. But yes, I guess it comes from Donald Trump. Witkoff follows what Donald Trump tells him. And that's why he has a constantly a very perverted picture of the history of the conflict. They follow the Russian propaganda. So that's what Russians are very kind of tricking the Americans into their own narrative, totally wrong and totally incorrect. But Russians are KGB's masters in doing those things, manipulating the opponent and telling lie after lie. And again, the question is when the intelligence of Witkoff, apparently they are not very intelligent, both Trump and Witkoff, will realize that what the Russians are saying are manipulations.
Given the lack of trust between the both sides, how long do you think it will be, if ever, that Ukraine and Russia get into a room and negotiate here in Saudi Arabia? There is obvious a kind of narrative, a sort of narration that Donald Trump and his special envoy are pushing. What do you think? Do you think this is helping the cause? Do you think this constant kind of publicity of these talks are helping the cause? Hold Russia and Ukraine maybe to account in the publicity of the Truth Social posts? What are your thoughts?
Excellent questions, Thomas. I think there could be a ceasefire. I'm not skeptic about the 30-day ceasefire. At some point it will happen. It kind of serves everybody. Trump will present this as a big deal. He will say, see, I promised you I deliver a peace. It's not peace, obviously ceasefire is not peace, but he will present it to all his crowd in America as a big peace. So for the ceasefire, I see some possibility because kind of it serves everybody, even the Russians at some point. They don't want to mobilize another army. They lost one army. They lost almost 1 million soldiers. So they don't want to recruit, yes, another 1 million of soldiers. So ceasefire works for Russia. It works for Ukraine, obviously, too. And for Donald Trump, who will present the ceasefire as the peace. He is best in those manipulations. But long-term, and your question is about long-term peace, here I'm very skeptical, exactly because of the totally different pictures of the origin of the conflict, of the nature of the conflict. And for that, we need the Europeans and the coalition of the willing to get together stronger and to support Ukraine and to sanction Russia. So unless we have strong support for Ukraine and increasing sanctions on Russia, the long-term peace will not happen.
Dr. Popovsky, thank you very much for joining us.